Joining me now, First Class Father Greg Kelly. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Alec, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here. First Class Father, I'm working on it. You know, I'm relatively new at it. I've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and yeah, I'm learning every day, and I hope I'm doing a good job. So far, so good.
You made it to the show here, so you got the First Class Father status right now. So you said you got a 1 and a 3. What are the denominations? What do you got? Boy, girl? What's the makeup there?
2 girls, which I'm told is a look. I'm happy. Some people they want 2 boys, a boy and a girl. This is whatever God gave me. It's a total miracle, and I love it.
Yeah, very well said. We had 3 boys first, then we got our girl on the 4th try. So you all done here? You shutting it down? You trying for one more? What's the story?
Everything is completely shut down. There is I think it's an impossibility. I won't get into the details, but I think it's an imposibility that there will be.
It would take a miracle at this point.
Yes.
If you could, Greg, please, for the people who don't know, just take a second to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
So my name is Greg Kelly. I host Greg Kelly Reports on Newsmax TV, 10 p.m. Monday through Friday. And I also have a radio show on WABC. I've been in media for about 20 years. I started in very small local television in upstate New York. I embarked in media after serving 9 years in the Marine Corps. I was a Harrier pilot. Got to go all over the world. I flew over Iraq. Did some really interesting things. It was a very important, formative experience for me. And let's see, I've been married for 6 years, and my new book came out a few weeks ago, Justice for All: How the Left is Wrong About Law Enforcement. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, life is good.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, we're going to jump into the book in just a second here. So being new into the game, 3 years into it. So how old were you when you became a dad here? And so far, how has becoming a father changed your perspective on life?
I guess I was 50, which is older than most fathers, obviously, first-time fathers. It made me much more focused. It made me far more disciplined. I had been in the Marine Corps. I thought I was disciplined, but you know, time is incredibly precious. The time I get to spend with them, and also the time I get to work. I have to be so focused. I think it just makes you so mission focused. Biologically, we're designed to provide for these children. And I never had that kind of, yeah, I wanted to work hard, do a good job. Yeah, have some money, but now it's survival depends on performance. So it's made me much more focused, not in a burdensome way. And today I just saw my daughter always makes a big fuss. We live in an apartment building, and she wants to press the down button for me every time. Runs down the hall, presses the down button, then she goes back, and she's just joyous, and she just runs back in. And I thought, these are gifts from God. I mean, this is obviously, I see God in everything, particularly in my children. There's just no denying it.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it too, Greg. And obviously, we're going to jump into this book here in just a second. And I think, listen, right now, I think I talk about on this show all the time that we got a fatherless crisis going on in our country here. We have so many kids growing up without a father or without a father figure in their life. And I think that is the prime mover behind all this stuff we're seeing happening in our society, particularly the crime, the drugs, the suicide, the teenage pregnancy, all of these things that are really crippling our country. When you get to the heart of it, I think it's all stemming from the fact that our nuclear family has been broken down, and the fact that so many kids are growing up, especially young boys who are growing up without that father, that strong male influence, because when they find it in the street, I think that's why we're filling up our prison systems with these fatherless kids. So I wanted to get your take on that, and then we'll jump into the book here.
Well, Alec, I agree with you 1,000%. And actually, that makes up a good chunk of my book. The fatherless epidemic we have is children growing up without a dad. That is a prime driver of crime. And I talk about it all the time. I write about it in my book. It's interesting, and I don't want to assume anybody's politics here. Okay, so this is apolitical somewhat, but there was a point where Barack Obama stood boldly and back in 2008, before he became president, after he secured the nomination, and he said, look, AWOL fathers, absentee fathers, we have them in all communities. But he said out loud, nowhere worse than in the African-American community. And he said, absentee fathers, too often it can lead to not graduating from high school. It can lead to drug abuse, and it can lead to prison. And it's kind of incontrovertible. There's so much data there, and it does affect all communities. But that conversation about the importance of fathers somehow has just faded away. People like you, so important to have people like you. I'm trying to make a contribution with this book, but it's interesting that with his platform, with his status, with his power, Barack Obama, he could have done so much. And the left, oh, by the way, after he made that speech, they said, we don't want to hear that anymore from you. Jesse Jackson actually threatened him with, I think, castration. He was caught on a microphone saying he's talking down to us. We can't have that. And Barack Obama really never went there again in any serious way, unfortunately.
Yeah, Greg, I quote from that. It was a Father's Day speech that he gave, and I often quote from that. I'll play clips of it every once so often. It was such an important and powerful speech that he made. And you're right, it just vanished from his dialogue, and we never to be heard from again. And the epidemic has only gotten worse since 2008. It continues to climb up. And we're going to tie this all in here because your new book, Justice for All, How the Left is Wrong About Law Enforcement. Obviously, right now, law enforcement, policing, police brutality, the whole topic is a contentious issue right now in the country. People are sensitive about this whole thing. How does your book attack this? How is the left wrong about law enforcement?
Well, they've been wrong about law enforcement for a very long time. But in this moment, we're seeing that their mistakes are being sanctioned and adopted and approved of by mainstream culture. Now, Black Lives Matter, it's right in their mission statement. They stand for the abolishment of police. They want to abolish police. They want to abolish prisons. They want to abolish what they call the punishment paradigm, that these are all leftovers of white supremacy and slavery. This is crazy. This is nonsense. But we've always had crazy people pushing crazy ideas. And that's fine. It's a free country. You can believe whatever you want. But the problem really started, we saw signs of it in 2012, 2013, 2014. But in 2020, the complete overreaction to George Floyd's death, which was horrible, but the country went crazy. And you saw organizations that should know better, like the NFL, like Procter & Gamble, just say, okay, Black Lives Matter. This is an organization. They're decrying. Fine, we'll put our logo. We're going to adopt Yep, we're on board. They did it thoughtlessly. They didn't know what they were signing up for. And the things you mentioned, the nuclear family. Black Lives Matter is opposed to the nuclear family. And it's not just Black Lives Matter, because there are other radical groups out there, and they become so mainstream that somehow, what do they call it? The patriarchy. Your show, by the way, is about the patriarchy. Yeah. Like that. And
I get that a lot.
Bad. I mean, like, how could that? Yeah, it's called civilization, and suddenly everything's in question. Everything is. So it's a crazy, crazy time, and people like you. Humbly, I would suggest people like me, I'm proud, quite frankly, to be standing up, because a lot of folks get very uncomfortable about this. And as soon as the left starts shouting, they intimidate all kinds of people. Oh, I better not say anything. I'll get canceled. I'll get harassed online. My boss might say something. Better to just keep my head down and go along with this nonsense, or at least not oppose it. And I'm so glad, quite frankly, that we're in a place where we can say no.
And Greg, to your point there, I think the same kind of hustle that was used with the Black Lives Matter, or the same messaging was used kind of like we saw with the vaccine rollout, Pfizer and all these things. They kind of made you feel like you were a bad person if you didn't get the shot. You were going to kill your grandmother. You're hurting society. And the Black Lives Matter messaging was more of to say, if you don't support this, you're obviously a racist. So it was more like, well, I do support the idea that Black Lives Matter. So you were kind of lured into this whole thing of like, oh, of course we're for that. And it was a sucker game the entire time to bring you in. This was obviously a socialist, Marxist agenda. The founders of this thing openly admitted that they are studiers of Marx. You mentioned it right there. Their open mission statement blatantly was against the nuclear family, which they had to remove because they were getting so much blowback just from within their own community saying, wait a second, we're not for this. We're for Black lives, but we're not for this kind of stuff. So we did see that kind of pushback. But we just had, obviously, this big thing was with the Tyree Nichols, with the black cops that were beating this kid, caught on video like so many of them are. Everybody jumped on it. And now, despite the fact that it was all black cops on a black suspect, we're still hearing the things from the CNNs that even though everybody was black, there still is racism involved. What was it, Van Jones? They might still have been driven by racism. So I think people, aren't they seeing through the messaging? Like, wait a second here. How could we be this gullible and hustled by this kind of messaging? And that, I think, is what we're seeing from the left, where they're forcing this. They want you to hate police and believe they're systematically racist. Or is the police department systematically racist? And what's your take on this?
Well, you beautifully summarized, but the hustle is working. It's working again. They're at it again. So obviously this wasn't racist. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why the country didn't burn down over the weekend. I mean, if there were 5 white cops doing that to a black man, I mean, by the way, what happened, I do believe, was murder. I cannot believe what they did to this man, Tyree Nichols. It boggles the mind. It's not racist. However, for the hard left, they'll say the police department is inherently racist. It was born out of the slave patrol. This is what the 1619 Project says. Now, that's absurd. Oh, by the way, that there's no basis. In fact, just about everything the 1619 Project came up with is wrong in fact. And law enforcement is not, can't be traced to slavery. It is just preposterous. So, but they're pushing this notion that somehow it's inherently, it's a white supremacy organization. So as a member of it, you are inherently racist, no matter what your race is. Now, it's crazy town stuff. They're out there pushing this. I saw on TV yesterday, a person comes up and says, well, we need the Breathe Act, we need this, we need that. And like you said a moment ago, some of it sounds reasonable. Black Lives Matter. What could be wrong with that? Nothing except the fine print. And then anyway, this person started talking about the Breathe Act, and we need the Breathe Act. And the host was like, well, thank you very much for coming. I got to look at this Breathe Act. Line 1, we must abolish the police. We must defund this. So in this moment, they're actually moving the needle. They're actually, and it's fascinating. It's a lower grade version of what happened in 2020, but in its own way, it's more effective because people are even more reluctant to try to put it in proportion. You know what I mean? Okay, horrible crime, but are we really going to cancel cops? Are we really going to now say to all these aggressive anti-crime units across the country that they must be disbanded? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. Okay, they had a problem in Memphis. That doesn't mean we have a problem in Detroit, but that's how it's going down.
And Greg, just as with the nuclear family being under attack, which I believe is totally by design, the race game is the racism stuff is being by design as well. They want us apart because there was just recently this kid, Kevin Hersey, I don't know if I'm saying the name right, in Redding, California, who police were beating this guy. I don't know if you've seen the clip of this guy, but there was like 4 or 5 cops kicking this guy in the face while he was down with a canine dog that was chewing on the guy. And if you go to CNN's Twitter and you look through their tweets and you search their tweets, the name doesn't even show up. Like, they don't even cover it. So it's like, yeah, we all understand that, yes, there are bad police officers that are out there. No one disputes that. You're going to find that in every single organization that there is. But be transparent about it. Be against all police brutality, not just this one specific thing that you're trying. We're all trying to get a grip on this. Let's at least be honest about the conversation and stop with the hustling, with the race stuff, to keep making it all about that. And I think that's what's turning so many people off. And I would argue that stopping so many good people who could potentially be phenomenal police officers from ever even considering a career in law enforcement because of all this stuff going on. What is your take on especially for parents out there that have kids right now that are in high school that are hoping to become a law enforcement officer? What do you say to those parents right now with those kids that have them dreams?
Well, I don't know if they have those dreams anymore. I feel like that's just it's the last thing anybody wants to do. It's probably the last thing I would recommend my daughters consider. Number one, they're women. I mean, there are great female law enforcement officers. I know actually one of them, but it wouldn't be my first choice. But now, are you kidding? I mean, not only was it a tough job to begin with, but now there's a damn good chance you're going to be arrested, or at least, have be disrespected in the street as you're executing your job. You said something interesting though about, every profession has problems, and we know that, but it's only the police where they actually kind of question the legitimacy of the entire profession. On a minute by minute basis, almost on an hourly basis, you can go to the NewYorkPost.com or any newspaper in the country, and there's a story about some teacher hooking up with some student. I mean, it happens all the time. It's just, and people read those stories for some reason, but it happens all the time. No one's talking about we need to have homeschooling from now on. No one's talking about getting rid of schools. Every time we go to war as a country, there are war crimes. It's one of the reasons why war is to be avoided unless it's absolutely necessary. But it happens, and innocent people die in combat, but we still do it. But generally speaking, we understand that we need a military, and no one's really calling for reform of the military. And there's example after example like that. It's interesting though. Black Lives Matter. They only seem to really care when the life taken is a black life taken by a white cop. That's the textbook example. It's one of the reasons why that kid in California, and I saw it with a dog. I have no idea what was going on there. Oh, by the way. And he was tumbling around in a white sheet. I have very confusing images, but it's not significant because of the racial factor.
Yeah, 100%. And it's easy. It's kind of easy when you take kind of your political goggles off or your racial goggles off, and you just look at what is happening. It's pretty obvious to see the narrative that's being pushed. I mean, you don't have to be a real, kind of like a con man or something to figure this out. It's pretty obvious the stories that they're pushing. And when you talk about, we always hear the rhetoric, defund the police, dismantle the police. And people will say more police don't prevent crime. They'll say it's the poverty that's creating the crime, and we have to do something about the poverty. Well, we cannot have the poverty conversation unless we have the fatherless crisis conversation, because the overwhelming majority of kids that are living under the poverty level are coming from single mom households. So you can't have they don't want to have that conversation about single moms or fatherless households. They want to have the poverty conversation, but it is impossible to have that poverty conversation unless we talk about restoring the nuclear family, getting dads back in the home, and then we could start to talk about all these other things. But to try to skip over that and attack poverty is completely baseless.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you talk about having a conversation. I've been hearing that a lot over the past couple of days in particular, and over the past couple of weeks. We need to have a conversation about race in America. We need to have a conversation about law enforcement. And it's interesting, those who normally say that are on the left, and they really don't want to have a conversation. They want to lecture us about what's right. You really can't raise these issues on mainstream media, CNN, that kind of thing. This is oh my goodness gracious. They just this is a conversation closer. This is where they go to commercial and they cut your mic. They don't want a conversation genuinely about these issues. And I know what the left has said, like as you mentioned, well, we have to address poverty and back to the Breathe Act. That will require money. We need money. It's interesting, all the trillions of dollars that have been spent on poverty programs, and it really went into overdrive in the 1960s. Trillions and trillions of dollars spent. And in the 1960s, fatherlessness in the black community was about on par where it is in the white community, about 25%. And now it's at 75%. The money is not helping. As a matter of fact, I say this in the book, it looks like we have disincentivized fatherhood with all the money that's flowing around. The government will take the place of the father.
Right. Yeah. And that's it. We've replaced parents with programs, and it can't be done. And it's something that There's many different causes of this. One of them being that you've had women become married to the government. Well, also the divorce court, family court system in this country. The number one email I get from dads across the country is how they got raked over the coals going to family court. They don't even get a fair shake when it comes to that. But that's a whole another discussion. I want to get back to your book, Justice for All, How the Left is Wrong About Law Enforcement. We got to find some solution sets here too, Greg, when we're talking about this stuff. Now, I had Mayor Rudy Giuliani on the podcast. I spoke to him a few times about this stuff. Obviously, he too took New York City from it was a shithole and turned it into a much safer place for families to live and thrive and work and live in once again. And he did that through the broken windows policy. We all lived through that and watched it. Right now, Mayor Adams has the helm. We've seen what's happening in New York with the Alvin Bragg. It's been a disaster. New York, once again, is become a scummy place to take your family. It's one of those places you don't want to have to walk through the city at night with your kids. So what do we do now? Do you talk about solution sets in Justice for All, especially containing it here maybe to New York or to the inner cities? How do we get this thing back to good where we have a common trust between the citizens and the police officers again?
Well, look, I do have some suggestions in the book, but I'm up front. Yes, I was in the military. I flew jets, but I'm not a law enforcement professional. I'm a keen observer of things, I like to say. And my father was one of the greatest law enforcement officials this country ever produced. Ray Kelly, longest-serving police commissioner in New York City history. In fact, the book is dedicated to him. And it's amazing. When he left office in 2014, January 1st, 2014, after 12 years as police commissioner, his personal approval rating in New York City was right around 72%, which show me a public official who was that popular, leading a police department in this city, which is majority minority. They were so crazy good at law enforcement, and the public understood that and appreciated that. We had the left come in and ruin it on purpose, And you can do that now, by the way. It's not as though 8 million people voted for de Blasio or voted for Eric Adams, who's a fraud, by the way, and I go into that in my book. The way New York is set up, you only have to appeal to a very, very small sliver of the population on primary day, which, oh, by the way, is the last day of school in June. You think this is designed for maximum voter participation? It's not. So we know how to do this. We know broken windows works. We know what good law enforcement looks like. It's not brain science. It's not that hard, or brain surgery, I should say, brain science. But three quick things I recommend in the book, and they're rather quaint. But number one, we have to get better at talking about race, and by we I mean conservatives or anybody. I'll throw liberals in here. If you believe in the Constitution, if you believe America is a pretty good place to live, or used to be, we have to get comfortable talking about race, because people on the left, they're dictating the conversation. And you have to play by their rules. And if you don't talk about it, you're not fluent in it, you can get tripped up really quick, and you just keep quiet. That's one thing. Number two, and this sounds very corny, but writing letters. Everybody's tweeting, everybody's emailing, everybody is sounding off on Facebook. When you write a letter with ink and send it to a member of Congress, things actually start to happen. It gets noticed, it gets replied to. Anybody listening, if you want, you can write to your congressman and ask for a meeting. 9 times out of 10, you'll get it. And the last thing I say in the book is, as far as recommendations, as much as we revere law enforcement, and we do, we have to understand that law enforcement works for us, all right? It's a public service. We respect them, we admire them, but they work for us. And what I saw in the aftermath of January 6th and the way those Capitol Hill cops were used, I don't know if they realize how badly they were used, but they were used, and they're up there and they're hysterical and they're shouting at lawmakers and demanding that they behave in a certain way. That's fascism. Unelected people in uniform who are armed, yelling at democratically elected officials, and those democratically elected officials caving, folding, retreating. That's fascism, and we don't want that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Justice for All. how the left is wrong about law enforcement. The link to the book is in the description of this podcast episode. And one of the things you say, we got to have this discussion about race. I've had quite a few different black fathers on the podcast here, had this discussion about, because we usually hear that from the black community. They have to have the talk with their kids. The talk being that if you get pulled over, you're going to be pulled over and pursued because you're black, because of your skin color. The police are out to get you. So when you get pulled over, there's a chance you might get killed. And they have the rhetoric as if, like, if you were just walking down the street while being black, you have a good opportunity of being shot by a police officer, which is totally false. And so that narrative is being pushed so much about the racial game, where I have, kids that are going to be driving now. My oldest is 16. And so we're going through these conversations about driving and when you get pulled over. And I would think more of it leads to just common sense, whether you're driving, you don't think you were driving too fast, but got pulled over for speeding. The way that you engage with the officer immediately upon him pulling you over is going to set the tone for this entire exchange. If you say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you pulling me over? You have this attitude, it's not going to go well. But if you say, hey, what was I going a little too fast there, officer? Or you start out the tone, it's going to change the course of that. That's my look at it as a dad. I know your kids a while away yet from being able to get behind the wheel, but what advice do you have for parents out there, for kids like myself who are just about to start driving and they get into a situation with the police? What do you tell the kids?
Number one, I don't believe that rhetoric about the talk. I've been hearing it a lot. I played it on the show last night. 50 people saying we have to have the talk. Bill de Blasio has to have the talk with Dante because he's black and he has to be really. It's human nature, if you're law abiding, to respect law enforcement. You know what I mean? Hey, what are you doing? Obviously you don't do that. And if that talk is really happening, why are so many people flipping off the cops? Why are so many people resisting? We have delegitimized the cops. We have reduced their authority to the point where you shouldn't be stopped. I'll say this about Tyree Nichols. And again, what happened to him should not have happened. My God, I noticed some resistance. He's on the ground, but he doesn't want to be prone on the ground. He seems to be sitting up. He's not offering his hands. But the penalty for that is not death, though, by the way. Okay, it's not. So, but there was some resistance. And the talk should be, don't resist. Don't resist. But I think that's a cute political talking point about the talk, because I've seen no evidence that it's actually happening.
And Greg, just to jump in there on you, that with those cops that were involved in this Tyree Nichols, it kind of almost looked like these guys, if you watch this whole thing, which was like 40 minutes of videotape, these guys seemed like almost like the Keystone Cops, like they're not talking to each other in like a professional police matter. They're talking to each other like they're just friends. Like they don't sound like they're professionals. It sounds like they're joking with one another. They're out of breath almost immediately. They don't seem like, and I know a few of them were hired after this whole reform the police thing, and I would imagine it's got to be getting. I mean, who in their right mind would want to be a police officer in Memphis? So I would imagine the bar has to be very low to hire police officers. But just from watching the video, these guys didn't look like they were professional. They're five huge guys. They couldn't handle this kid. They couldn't contain this kid. How could this even be possible? I'm watching this saying this almost not. There's nothing comical about it, but they're kind of joking with one. They sprayed each other in the face with mace. One of them tased himself. Like, what the hell was going on? Like, who's training these guys?
It's a great observation. Total incompetence is what I saw. I mean, after they initially pull him over and they remove him from the car and they're swarming him. At one point, Tyree Nichols, I tell you what, he said to them, "You guys are saying a lot of things right now," because they were overwhelming him. Like, you can't comply with everything they were saying. And then five guys, and he gets away. He got away. They could not effect an arrest. So incredible incompetence. Yes, I'm hearing now that they may have even allowed felony convictions in the past of some police officers. A report today, I didn't know that, and I'm still checking that out. Obviously, the standards have gone out the window. It's very hard to find cops, but you're absolutely right. It was, and I did notice this. Actually, my father pointed it out. It was a very long time, 20 minutes go by before the ambulance gets there, and he's noticed no radio car. You'll notice they're all unmarked cars. There's no Memphis police car with the sirens going. That indicates to him that they kept this away from supervisors. They may have had their own discrete frequency. This may have been something personal. Who knows? But they wanted to, it looks like, keep it off the radar of their higher ups.
Yeah, no, there's something was off about the way this. I mean, they came at that kid as if he just shot up a school. I mean, they came at that kid hardcore. You would think he was armed to the teeth or something, the way that they did it. But anyway, a lot going on. I pray that we can somehow come to some kind of agreement once again between the citizens of this country and law enforcement. I respect law enforcement as a father, as a family man. I know that we need law enforcement. We don't have a chance in this country without them. Just the same with our military. And I thank you for your service. And for your fathers as well. I loved your dad as the police commissioner. Wish we had him back in New York again. So let's close this out here. Again, Justice for All, How the Left is Wrong About Law Enforcement. Link in the description of the podcast episode. Last thing I'm going to hit you with here, Greg. Love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about-to-be father who's out there listening?
Wow, I still feel like a new dad myself, but... And one of the words that I hear my daughter say a lot these days is, she says two things. Where are you going, Daddy? And she says, where were you, Daddy? Which, I mean, like, I'm gone a lot, but I've done something. I always try to spend time with him in the morning. Okay, this is it. What is something? Look, I can just go back to, and I haven't been able to do this with my own daughters yet, but my father, his example, we talked a lot. He did not have a lot of external obligations apart from work. It was the family. We spent a lot of time together. We talked. We watched TV. I went on errands with him. And during those conversations, I learned a lot from him. And also, I guess, leadership by example. I mean, I don't want my kids to take up drinking. I never saw my father drink. I never saw my father smoke. I never saw my father raise his voice. And those are some of the things that I would like to be. He's helped me. I haven't been perfect in any of those things, by the way. But he set me up for success. And any mistakes anywhere I've fallen short, that's on me. So perhaps I got to go to my father, that is, they're watching you. I know right now they're watching me, and they're mental notes, and we're creating them. And I'm a little bit concerned about the phone, you know what I mean? And I am consciously trying to not have them see me on the phone, which is tricky. So it's a work in progress, Alec.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Greg Kelly, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for taking a few minutes of your time here to join me on First Class Fatherhood.
Alec, thank you so much. What a pleasure, and to be continued, sir. All right?